All right, we are live here on the internet with Carol Hamilton, my guest today for the Creative Imposter Live, coming back to our live streams after a brief hiatus. Carol, thank you for bringing me back from internet oblivion.
Well, I'm glad to be here and glad to be able to have this conversation with you, Andrea.
Absolutely. So, for my listeners, viewers, whoever you are in the audience, Carol and I met through some podcasting meetup. I've been going to a bunch of them through different organizations. So, one
I
of the
think it was the
meetups,
podcastathon
the
or podcastathon. Yeah.
podcast thon, yes.
Yes.
That would make sense because Carol's world is nonprofits. And she has a podcast, which is how we came to a podcasting meetup called Nonprofit Mission Impact. And I've been dipping into Carol's show here and there to hear certain episodes, not because I particularly am a nonprofit leader, but because I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations and even some for profit entities that have a mission imperative or have an impact driven purpose. And that sort of defines the clients that we work with at the Creative Imposter Studios. And I know that our work has been changing, which Carol and I have done a deep dive into and what our clients need in these times that we find ourselves in has been shifting and changing a lot, especially in the past year in the United States. And so I really wanted to bring Carol on to talk about strategy and how nonprofit organizations and mission driven organizations look at strategy because it's not always the same as, like, for example, a for profit corporate structure. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of importance between balancing sort of the quantitative and qualitative measurements of how do we know if the work that we're doing is actually doing the thing we want it to do? Are we reaching the people, et cetera, et cetera? And so that is where our conversation begins today. And Carol, I pulled up your title here online. Your title on your website says that you are a nonprofit inclusive strategic planning and evaluation design consultant. And that is a lot of words.
It is. Nonprofit folks, we do like our words.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what that actually means? Like, what do you actually do?
Yeah, so I have a background in organization development, and then also had been in this or have been in the sector pretty much since early in my career. I had a brief moment, my very first job where I worked for a for-profit organization, but since then have been in the nonprofit sector, and so I help organizations, forecast and kind of design their future around using inclusive strategic planning, but then also for what they are doing, helping them design a process so that they can do exactly what you were talking about. Have a way to measure, is what we're doing actually moving us forward towards our mission? Are the actions we're taking having the kind of impact that we want with the people that we're working with, or what with the purpose that drives our organization and our work? So both those are two kind of different aspects of strategy, but both of those are what I really enjoy doing. It came when I came out of graduate school and was, finished. I was did that while I was working, but did the Gallup Strengths Finder,
Oh, yeah.
and I was then doing it with a team where you look at like what the clusters are, and almost all of my top 5 were in the strategy column. So I was like, okay, that helps. That helps me kind of define what I need to focus on. So
Yeah, absolutely. And why, for you personally, why is working with nonprofits on their mission and their impact, why is that personally important to you?
yeah, I mean, sadly, we at this point, and actually probably since the beginning, the nonprofit sector in the U.S. is, it's essentially a band-aid, trying to deal with the gaping wound that is created by capitalism. But I'd rather be on the side of helping the helpers and being part of the solution, rather than being part of the problem. So that's really what motivates me, is to, for all of those organizations trying to help people, trying to move, lots of different missions forward. Some of them are direct service, but others, obviously, there's research. I mean, there's just such a wide variety of organizations within the sector, but all of them trying to do something that creates, a better world for everybody. And so I want to be part of that process.
I am going to resist the temptation to name this episode after the fact, The Gaping Wound Created by Capitalism.
Which, unfortunately, this year is just getting worse and worse.
Well, and that brings me to a segue to one of the questions that I had, which is, do you have any examples from the past year of clients that you've been working with or organizations that you've seen who are facing particular challenges this year? Like, what are you seeing as being some of the top questions or challenges or struggles? And do you have any specific examples of things that you've been working on this year with some of your organizations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think different segments of the sector have been, impacted, different ways. Obviously, those that depended on government funding, some partway through the year may have realized that what they thought was state funding was actually a federal pass through, and so that suddenly disappeared. Obviously, at the beginning of the year, with the decimation of AID, the folks in the international development field, the field just basically disappeared overnight. Uh, and I think there's going to be ripple effects that are ongoing as we, next year, there's going to be a whole nother round of organizations that are impacted. And then often, what always happens in recessionary times is budgets for nonprofits are impacted, while at the same time demand for their services grows. So in talking to different leaders, I've heard many say, we can't even focus on our core mission right now because we have to focus on meeting the basic needs of our clients. You know, providing food, providing emergency services of different kinds has not been a central part of our mission, but we're having to kind of um, reallocate our focus because that's what people need right now. So, uh, the amazing thing is that people keep stepping up in the sector, and dealing with everything that's being thrown at them. But I mean, one of the things that I've been doing with clients and going to continue in this next year is, um, shifting in terms of, for many people, it doesn't feel like it's a time when you can kind of forecast 3 to 5 years out. And so really there's, uncertainty is always there, but it's even more so now. I mean, I feel like so many things that we're dealing with in the sector, in terms of burnout, in terms of scarce resources, in terms of people being stretched thin, all of those things were already there, and it's just more so. It's worse. Um, and so one way to deal with that is a process called scenario planning that helps you kind of imagine a variety of different futures and then really think about how might you react to each of those. And then from that, really think about, okay, what of those are within our control? Are we seeing commonality across those different scenarios of what our reaction should be? And so then what might we decide to do? And I feel like it's a way for organizations to kind of reclaim their agency when they just feel like right now it's just reacting to the latest crisis. And so how can you steady the ship a little bit and decide, okay, regardless, we know all of this, we know we're in the storm, but we still need to move forward in some way.
And I know also nonprofit, we kind of say nonprofits, right? And nonprofits are not a monolith. Like there's so many different sizes of budget, and there's so many different sectors within that. So many different, like I particularly work with a lot of arts and culture type organizations, educational organizations, but there are also organizations that are maybe more geared towards social justice or rights or survival of certain groups. And so sometimes it's a little bit challenging to, mm, when the need is so great, how do you determine whether it's important to support a local string quartet, for example, versus a food bank, or something like that. And so I'm curious, like, where do you have a specialty, like a special type of nonprofit that you specifically work with, or um, do you see commonalities across these different organizations right now, or does it depend on what their focus is?
Yeah, I think from the point of view of the organization, the sector, the niche that they're in is very important in terms of working with organizations. What's often more important is their kind of stage of development. Are they a
Mhm.
startup? Are they, in their first 10 years, kind of adolescent? Are they mature? Um, and that budget piece. So yeah, Harvard University with an endowment that is larger than the GDP of many countries is very different than your local food bank,
Yeah.
right? So, but they're both in the sector. Um, so that budget size, the number of staff, the number of volunteers, the complexity of the size of the organization has a big impact as well. And that'll also impact, how they work with their board, their governance, all of those kinds of things. And so for me, I tend to work with kind of human centered missions. So that might be education, human service. I've also worked with a variety of healthcare and conservation environmental organizations. So there's quite a bit of variety. But I tend to work with organizations that are established, have staff, and just want to get better at what they're
Hmm.
doing.
So with the scenario planning, yeah, scenario planning. I was like, am I using the right word? I'm learning the lingo here as
Yeah,
we
yeah.
speak.
I mean, and the name of it isn't that important. It's just that it's particularly, there's people talk about strategy as this kind of broad. There's so many different definitions of it, but it's just another tool in the strategy tool belt, if you will.
Mhm.
And so I think it's one that's particularly suited for the level of uncertainty that we're dealing with right now, because it doesn't. It just assumes that there are all these variables that you need to deal with. And so it's helping you kind of imagine what those different variables might do to a future and then how you might react to it.
And I feel like that is really not specific to like the way you go about it is probably specific to a nonprofit structure, but the premise is pretty universal because I think even,
Oh,
those
and
of
I
us
think
who
it
are,
came out of the for profit. I mean, it was
yeah,
probably, one of those things that was created by ExxonMobil, where a lot of strategy tools came from.
okay.
Yeah, or the military. And no, and I think the thing that is different about doing strategy in a nonprofit setting is that regardless of the size of the nonprofit, there's no owner, and it's always a collective endeavor.
Hmm.
So there are always multiple stakeholders, always multiple people involved. And I think, if you were to think of a comparably sized small business to, let's say, your local food bank, that's probably going to have an owner, maybe, a couple senior people that work there. They'll get in a room and make decisions. A small nonprofit can have 20, 30 people who are important to making decisions. So it's just very different in terms of the scale of the collective that needs to be involved and the stakeholders that need to be involved.
That makes sense because one of the scenarios that you and I talked about at length, sort of privately, and not to divulge too much behind the scenes of what's happening with my clients and the organizations that I work with, but obviously I am a podcast producer, increasingly more and more of a podcast strategist. Again, this wasn't what I initially set out to do, but it's very necessary right now to um, the the existential realities of both my business and the work that I do because you know it's clients are coming to me and saying, we've been producing this podcast for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and we love the podcast. Everybody knows intrinsically that it is a meaningful part of what we do. Everyone who's part of it knows we've won awards. We know that the quality is top notch. And we know that it's meaningful. But in this time when we are being forced to really scrutinize budgets and every program that we have to, as you said, like, see how does this program or this project or this line item in the budget, how does this redirect back to our core mission? And they're saying, like, help us make this make sense, basically. And it becomes, if I'm working with a small business owner, which some of my clients are, like more of a solopreneur type business, right? Where it's one person who's making the decisions, it's one person who's in charge of the budget and, what their offerings are, versus this nonprofit organization. We've got to check in with PR. We've got to check in with the department that I'm working with, which in this case, my company that I was working with or am working with is an opera company. So we're working primarily with community engagement. And it's like, how do all the pieces of the marketing, the PR, the development, the fundraising, the main stage performances, the community engagement programs in the schools, you have all these different stakeholders, and you have to find, like, what is the thing that we're going to do that serves all those pieces at once. um, any thoughts on, like, speaking to the challenges of finding the things that will work, or how do you sort of bring together all of the different imperatives of all the different stakeholders and departments within a larger organization?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge conundrum, and, um, if you were in calmer times, one of the things that you might do for any of those things was kind of walk through a process to say, okay, so, what do we expect in the short term that a podcast will do? Who are the people that are involved? What impact is it having on them? And then, what are those midterm and longer term outcomes that we can expect? I mean, oftentimes when I'm doing this with clients, what they're looking at is, something more in depth. Um, I know that you volunteer with you teach with a high school where you're teaching students how to do podcasting. And so you're with them for, a semester, or maybe it's a year. And so when somebody would look at that program, there's a little bit more of there's more of a connection
Mhm.
built through something like that than anything that you're going to do on the media and communication side, whether it's a podcast or, an article in a newsletter or a magazine or the website. So I think even though the methodology is the same, what the expectations of what one podcast or one podcast episode can do is just going to be widely different, because that level of engagement is so different. On the other hand, I think, as we've talked a lot about in the podcast space, when someone listens to a podcast, there's a different level of connection that they feel than, if I were to read the same thing as a blog post, because it's literally in your ear most of the time. I mean, most people are, wearing it with earbuds. And so it's like directly going into their head. It feels very much like the host is speaking directly to them.
Yeah.
And so, but I think we have to compare apples to apples, right? So, and it's so interesting to me. I mean, obviously, there's been so much developed, and this isn't really the whole marketing area is not necessarily my area of expertise, but it has been interesting to me how much push there is for that proof in a way that 10, 15, 20 years ago, when we didn't have all these digital metrics to be able to track people's behavior, people did all these things on faith,
Mm,
PR, advertising,
mm, mhm.
writing a newsletter. You didn't know. All you knew was that, back when I did mailings for the first
Yeah.
nonprofit that I worked for, right? All that you knew was that you put those things in the mail and how many you got, how many addresses were bad. You
Yeah.
didn't know whether the person opened it or read it or did any of the things that you can now see via digital means. And so the level of expectation of things being able to, do what you say they're going to do, I think is totally different.
Yeah, you're giving me flashbacks to the short period of time that I worked in the development department for the Lyric Opera of Chicago here in Chicago. I learned very quickly that I was not meant for development. That wasn't my thing. Um, but we had to do all the mail merges and print the mail merge software was literally I would do anything to pass that off on one of my coworkers and not have to do the mail merge. Like,
Or how about, the labels and putting them on and do it and
putting the
everybody having a
labels
party,
on,
get a pizza, everybody does the mailing.
removing the
You
dead
age yourself when
addresses
you do
that
all
came
that,
back.
right?
Oh my God. We had central filing with like a file cabinets that were literally in the center of the office, and we had to like put all the mail communications with the donor in the donor folder, and like, oh my God.
Yeah, but there's
Oh,
a pressure now to be able to, directly prove things in a way that there wasn't when we did all that.
yeah,
The
and it's
old-fashioned way, the
it's
analog way.
it is challenging, as you say, because it's like how so often in the podcasting space, or with a lot of marketing channels, really, like that person is receiving that message, but even if it's a billboard that they see driving down the highway, you don't really know what is happening, like from the time that they're driving down the highway and they see the billboard till like you can't measure a direct outcome
Mm-mm.
from that. And a lot of times it's like the collective, it's like all the different marketing messages that, they got an email and they saw the billboard and a friend talked about a thing, and it's like what was the thing that tipped them over the edge to cause them to buy the ticket or make the donation or whatever it was. It's really hard to track, and so it's been interesting for me, to know that it's important to be able to show that what you're doing is working, but it's also really hard in the particular work that I'm doing.
And I mean, honestly, it's hard in the rest of the organization too, right? I mean,
Okay.
we use that example of your education program. You can probably do some evaluation at the very end of the program, maybe mid program, maybe you do a before pre-test, post-test to be able to see learning in the short term, but it gets more and more difficult to be able to track people over time, and get information from them once they've graduated from a program. So even in things that have a longer engagement, it's very challenging. Not to say that one shouldn't try to do it.
Oh,
It's
and for
just that
sure that
it's
organization has tons of,
yeah,
we have surveys that the students hate
yeah,
filling out at the end of
right.
every session. They're like, "Oh, do I have
Why
to
do I have
do
to do
it?"
this
I'm like,
again? Oh my
"Yes, you have
God.
to do it, because then otherwise if you don't, this program will never exist for future students."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for you, if you're thinking about you're working with an organization that's doing a podcast, and who generally, like, I think people automatically think about the listener, but
Mhm.
who else is impacted by that, just that first step of just creating the episode?
Mhm.
I'm asking the question.
You're asking me and I'm writing notes. Yeah. So
It
I
wasn't a rhetorical question, it's what I was trying to say.
yes. So obviously, like whoever our guest is, whoever we're bringing on, and sometimes those guests are um, people within other departments who are other parts of the opera, right? So they're coming in to talk about their work or their process or their department. Sometimes it's some of the actual stakeholders, like, in community engagement with the opera, for example, they're working with elementary school children all the way up through young adults who are heading into college. And then they're even also working with adults who are volunteers with the opera. They run the volunteer corps. So they have like the full lifespan of people who are engaged with the opera in different ways. So we might bring on some of the students who are part of the high school program and talk with them, or the composers and the creative team behind a new opera that's been commissioned and workshopped through their department. So it's collaborators, artists, students, members of the community, employees of the opera. It's all those different people who are part of the creation of the product itself.
So, I mean, probably if I was trying to work with you to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to track and have some sense of what the impact is. The first step would just be, catalog who those people are, what are the categories of folks, and then for each of those categories in the short term, what would you be able to expect that if you had some students from, let's say, your middle school program come on the podcast, what would you expect that would be the impact of them doing that? Like, what for them would have changed?
Yeah, I think for them, it would be, well, their confidence in being able to speak about their art, because I notice,
Mhm.
especially with, because we've done a lot with the high school students specifically, and with them, a lot of them are just now. Some of them are very serious about opera already, and some of them are very serious about music, but maybe opera is new to them, right? And this is the first time that they're looking at like this particular possible career path. And so for them to be able to be on the podcast to talk about what they're doing and talk about their program, that gives them a level of confidence and professionalism, which is really what they're trying to do, is help train these young students to be able to move forward in a professional direction through academia or whatever, path that they decide to go. So just that level of being able to speak about what they do, and also their connection to the opera company itself, right? Like, I know for me, if I was featured by a particular company or media outlet or something like that as a young person, that sticks with me. And I was part of that. I am part of this company, right? Because I represented them on the podcast, and
Absolutely.
that makes that significant sense of ownership of being affiliated with this company.
Yeah, I mean, I remember to this day a art contest that my painting, I think I was in maybe 4th grade, got included in this exhibit. I mean, I'll have to admit, whatever number of years later, I don't remember exactly who sponsored the exhibit, but I have very strong memory of doing that. And yeah, you don't forget those kinds of things, and so it does have an impact. And I really appreciate, it's so interesting because when I first started my podcast, that was one of my assumptions, that I would actually also get more comfortable in speaking about the work that I do and being able to explain it. And
Mhm.
that has totally been true over the years. I'm much more fluent in being able to, have conversations like this, or have a shorter way to explain what it is that I'm doing. All those kinds of things have been an impact for me over time of doing the podcast. So, and I could imagine for young people as well, if they are serious about the art, then being able to use a clip of them being on the podcast or being featured as part of a portfolio or
Mhm.
other thing would be of value to them. So that would be kind of one of those first steps. And then for each of those groups, thinking, okay, this is the immediate impact. And obviously, listeners are going to be one of those groups that you want to think about.
Yeah.
Well, what can we expect that someone might do? What might change for them if they were to listen to an episode, and let's say, at least, I don't know, 3/4 of it, for example. What might we expect them to do. I mean, I kind of know what are some of the things I've done based on listening to podcasts and the actions I've taken. So,
Do you
I
have
know
any
that
examples you can share with us?
I sure do. I've definitely bought a lot of books that have been recommended by different people or where the author has been interviewed.
Mhm.
Um, Lots and lots of books on my bookshelf that originated from me listening to someone on a podcast. And then also, I've taken different professional development courses and been involved in programs based on getting to know the person who's offering it through a podcast first. So those are, and that was part of what kind of motivated me to do mine was that I saw that I was taking action based on listening to a podcast
Mhm.
versus reading a blog or reading a newsletter.
And speaking of your podcast, I mean, to kind of pivot here on that point, um, how long have you been doing podcasting?
Yeah, for 5 years now.
5 years. Okay, that is a significant amount of time.
Yeah, so I have
Congratulations.
thank you. I hit my 5-year podiversary in August of this year.
Okay.
So I started August of 20 well, I actually started recording in March of 2025, but my released my first episode in August of 2020. And so yeah, it's been and I just really enjoy doing it, which is why I'm doing it 5 years later. And it's been so much fun.
Besides the fun of it, and besides the becoming better at speaking about the work that you do and more comfortable and confident about expressing that, do you have any um, other metrics, quantitative or qualitative metrics that
Yeah.
help you know whether your podcast is on track and whether it's something to continue investing in?
Yeah, yeah. So I do it primarily, I'm doing it in connection with my business, and to educate nonprofit leaders. But it has a couple different knock-on effects for me. I talk to other people who support nonprofits in a variety of ways, so other consultants. And I think one of the most valuable things you can have for your clients is not just know your own expertise, but also be connected to a whole group of people that can help them in different ways. So, there's lots of different ways to network. Um, but what I find is that, you can have a coffee chat with someone, you can meet them in a networking event, you can, um, talk to them that way. And that gets you started. But this is a way to really get to know them a little bit better. And it's almost like you're doing a tiny little project with them. I get a chance to see their work style,
Hmm.
and so that gives me insight on whether there's someone that I want to have as part of my referral network.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, it's so much fun because I get to let them shine and share their expertise. And yeah, often I've had several people who've never been on a podcast before, and they all say, it was a great experience. I was really nervous beforehand, but you made it really easy.
Yeah.
And I always remind them, uh, you know what you're talking about because this is what you do. That's all I'm asking you about. So don't worry. I also don't come at it from the point of view of I don't see myself as a journalist.
Yeah.
So there are no gotcha questions
Right.
in our conversations. It's all good stuff. So, but those are some of the things for me, getting to, and then it also helps me stay abreast of what's going on in the sector. I mean, just hearing from other people what they see as trends or what they're hearing from their clients. It's just very valuable.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I really, sorry, listeners and viewers. My podcast is really about my guests and not about you. No, that's not true. That's not true. But it is very much like I bring people on who I want FaceTime with, right? Who
Yep.
I want to hear from. I want to learn something. It's not just I do want to introduce you, the guest, to my client or to my audience because I think that you have something inspiring and something useful and something helpful for them. And I want them to be able to learn from you. If it's aligned that they're doing work that they need you to help them do, then great. That connection is awesome. But I'm also bringing on people that I want to learn from, that I am like, I can expand my knowledge, I can expand my awareness of what's happening in these different places by having these conversations. Every guest that I bring on, it sparks like 5 new ideas in my
Oh,
brain of
absolutely.
something that I can do for my own business or for my clients' shows or,
Mhm.
something like that. And so, having sort of this massive network mastermind through the conversations that you're having on your show is so important for me.
Yeah, absolutely, and I built relationships with people who, I've had come back on the show, and we followed up on the conversation, and there's one person who, I have her on probably, like, once a quarter, so it's not like she's my co-host, but, we kind of do a what we call a learning out loud episode where we are talking about kind of what's going on in the sector,
Yeah.
and that's great fun, and, I'm confident that people are finding value in it because I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, from listeners as well, so
So we're recording this in December at the end of 2025. The lightly edited audio version will be releasing into the Creative Imposter podcast feed in January of 2026. Hopefully, a whole new world by then, right? And I've heard this is something, we have the New Year's, like New Year, New You, like all those campaigns trying to capitalize on what I have learned in behavioral economics lingo is called the fresh start effect. Um, and it's very powerful for marketing. So that's why you see all those New Year, New You campaigns. But last year, I was hearing people say that just with the vibes that were going on last year and just how people were feeling and certain things happening socially, economically, etc., that people didn't feel like they were able to hit the ground running in January. January still felt like I'm still trying to get my bearings and figure out what is happening. And so I was hearing people saying February is the new January. And I'm like, that makes me feel a little better.
well,
Like,
we had a in the US at least, we had a very particular event in January as well
correct. um,
last year.
yeah. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I'm hoping I feel like people, were a little bit kinda reeling this year and for very, very good reasons. And I also feel like there was a little bit of kinda like duck and cover, like, how are we gonna get through this? How are we gonna survive? Which is all important. And so a lot of kind of reactivity and, when there's all this going on, crisis, that's what you have to do. So, no fault in any of that. And I think, um, there may be opportunity for people to start thinking, okay, whatever's happening, we have to keep moving forward. What do we need to do? We need to kind of regroup. We need to have conversations. We need to get out of this just putting out fires cycle. And so, I'm hopeful that there'll be some opportunity for people to kind of get together and have some conversations about what is it that we really want to focus on over the next, year, 2 years. So,
so doing our best to do some long-term visioning
and
amidst the short-term problem solving.
yes, yes. Trying to not allow, or rather, I guess I turn it around and maybe that new year, new you of like just doing a reset and saying, okay, we got to figure out where we have agency, what's within our control, and what we want for the future, versus always reacting to someone else's vision that we're not in agreement to.
And you said that that's part of the new offering that you have. through Grace Social Sector. Can you say anything more about that new offering and how that works and who that might be right for?
Yeah, yeah. So we talked a little bit about it before. Scenario planning. So you
Mhm.
can find that under Grace Social Sector dash scenario dash planning. Way too many letters, too many words. Um, but it's really a way for organizations to kind of, like I said, take a look at a variety of futures of what might be. It's not about predicting the future. Strategic planning never is, but I think people get hung up on trying to find the one right answer. And this kind of breaks you out of that and gives you an opportunity to look at a variety of different paths and then think about what might we do in each of those scenarios. And then oftentimes you'll find that there are a couple things that are popping up for what you might do in a multiple. So then they're like, okay, well, it's going to be good for us in scenario A, you know, uh, to do this and in scenario C. So that probably is a good thing for us to prioritize. I was working with a client this year where, one of those, and it's probably been true for many, many organizations. What was a very obvious next step for them was to diversify funding
Mm.
and look at ways to do that. And so that was coming up no matter what was going on outside. And so they prioritized that this year.
That's so interesting. I love, yeah, I'm like, I think see, I want to do this now for my business too. Where I'm like, what are the different scenarios? Because I feel like my problem is that I always start off with the most positive scenario, like the ideal thing. That's where I start, and then quickly, as soon as one thing goes not to plan or one thing gets, then I'm immediately in the doomsday planning, and so I'm very much
Well,
in
what I
that.
love about this, and mostly it's trying to look at kind of things outside the organization. So, what's
Okay.
that wider ecosystem that you're within? But you have a doomsday scenario, you have a
Yeah.
best case scenario, but you also have two others that are like a little bit of good, a little bit of bad on either side. And so it's really interesting to kind of see the shades. You know, 4 is what you're going. We go for 4 matrix, like many consultants love a matrix. Um, but because I think you can't really, I mean, you could do multiple
Yeah.
scenarios with multiple variables, but there's only so many that our brain can handle. So that's a good number to kind of take a look at, and it gives you a good lay of the land in terms of you will have already had the group decide these are the two things that are if they're different, if they go in one direction or the other, are going to have the biggest impact on us. So it's a way to kind of, it doesn't eliminate the uncertainty that's in the environment, but it gives you a little bit of a way to kind of get your arms around it and decide, make some decisions for yourself so that you do feel a little bit more of that agency around
Yeah.
this is in our control. We can do these things.
Yeah. That word keeps coming up today, agency.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm gonna write that down on my whiteboard and let that percolate a little bit. What's that bringing up? Um, as we kind of come to a close here, I do want to ask a little bit personally about burnout. You had mentioned burnout earlier today, and I know that this time of year, there's a lot of emotions that sort of come up with holidays and time off and end of year stuff. And even though not all nonprofits follow the calendar year for their fiscal year, there's still like end of year giving, campaigns, and pushes to get things done before the quote done before the end of the year so that you can go on whatever break or vacation you're planning without having something like looming in your mind. There's personal stuff happening, there's family stuff, there's financial stuff, there's all kinds of stuff happening at this time of the year. And so I'm curious, like for you, uh, and for the people that you work with, when we are feeling like, man, I would love to do some visioning about what is possible and the world that I want to live in and what I want to see for the next 2 or 3 years, but I am tired.
It's
I'm
really
like,
hard. It's really hard, and it's hard. I think it feels like a luxury, and it's hard for leaders to prioritize it. And then if they don't, um, they know, we know they're probably not being as effective as they could be. So I feel like it's a little bit of an antidote to that
Mm,
burnout, because oftentimes the burnout is just like the, oh my god, my to-do list, is running out the hallway, and beyond. I'm never going to get, that treadmill effect, or always kind of dealing with the latest fire to put out. But and I mean, burnout, unfortunately, our sector is built to create burnout in
mm,
staff members, just because of the way that people are pulled in by, caring about a mission. And then with that, I think there's a lot of assumptions about, what you have to give up and what you have to sacrifice in order to do that. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons, the tagline for my podcast is "Do good in the world without being a martyr to the cause," because I don't think it really actually serves anybody to be in that martyr space.
yeah. That's so important and wise words. I would love to let our audience know that this conversation is part of a new series that we're doing here on the Creative Imposter as we go into 2026. The short link is up on the screen, and that is bit.ly/arts versus job. And as I say that out loud, I realize that versus is a terrible thing to put in a short link because you don't know whether it's spelled out or abbreviated, but yes, it is art, singular, one art, versus VS job, job. And what that is a series called When Your Art Becomes Your Job. And I thought that this was a great bridge conversation for our previous series, which was Creativity and Media as Resistance, which is more about the mission, the outward focus, the impact, the global change, global vision, moving into more of this personal narrative about when you are doing work that you get paid for, or there is an expectation on you to do a particular thing, but it's connected to your art. It's connected to the thing that you're passionate about. It's connected to something that is meaningful to you and intrinsic, and a lot of times to your identity and who you see yourself as. And I feel that this conversation around nonprofit leaders, I feel like a lot of leaders in the nonprofit space are deeply connected to the mission of their work, and it does become or is part of their identity. And I wonder if there's anything that you can speak to on that from what you've seen with the clients that you've worked with in terms of uh, balancing what it balancing the meaning of what you're creating with the expectation of it being your job.
Yeah, it's so hard to balance those two, because yeah, most people go into the sector, they're not expecting, uh, the first sacrifice that they're going to make is they're not going to make a ton of money. They may, hopefully you're in places where you are, have a living and thriving wage, but that's not the motivation for most people. It's the mission, it's the purpose of the organization, and often people are very, very strongly identified with that. It's the thing that they want to solve in the world. It's the thing that they want to see have a different outcome. And so I'll have to give you the citation later, but there's a librarian who wrote about this and called it, I think it was called vocational awe. And it was the idea that with that kind of mission driven piece, there's so many things that the culture of the organization expects you to give up, but you may also like do that too. Like if I'm this dedicated to this mission, I don't deserve to take a lunch. That's like a luxurious thing versus self care. So I think there's a huge amount of push pull, and there's compassion fatigue, but there also can be passion, kind of the extraction that happens when your passion and your job are one.
Now I'm down the rabbit hole because I just looked it up. Vocational. awe, and I'm like, "Oh, this is a thing."
It's a thing. Oh, I stumbled upon it. I was like, "Oh my god, thank you, whoever it was that coined that term and described it," because I was like, "Oh yeah." I mean, she
We
talked
will
about it in terms of librarians, but any kind of helping profession and so many different things in the nonprofit sector, arts, as you're talking about, creatives, it's all there.
we will definitely find the citation and put a link to it in the show notes for this episode in the podcast feed, which everyone can find on your favorite podcast platform. I'll give a plug for Pocket Casts. That is my favorite third party independent podcast platform. But wherever you're finding this, and of course, here on YouTube as well. I do want to encourage everyone, if nonprofit work is part of your world, to check out Nonprofit Mission Impact with Carol Hamilton. And if this type of scenario planning or strategic work is something that your organization is looking at, for sure, check out gracesocialsector.com to learn more about the services that Carol offers and how to get in contact. And Carol, is there anything else that is coming to your mind that we didn't talk about or that feels important for you to say right now?
Oh, I just encourage people to keep on keeping on. You know, that's what we got to do.
That is totally fair. And that is where we'll end it. Thank you, everybody, for those of you who dipped in live, and also for those of you watching the replay. Of course, as I said, the edited audio version will be available in the Creative Imposter feed in the new year. And thank you for being a part of this community. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.